Hold on, I'm having issues. I'm going to come back.
Okay, just some housekeeping, like if we were in the same room together. My name is Sunny Summers. I am ODA's Cannabis Policy Coordinator. We ask that everybody keep themselves on mute during the presentation. We will have opportunities for questioning after the presentation. And what we would like is for everybody who is participating to put their name in the chat so that Emily can track who has met the training requirements as set out in the ODA rules. So with that, I am going to turn the time over to Emily. I'm going to be in the background kind of helping with letting folks in if we have some late folks. And again, in the chat, if you can, please put your name so that we know who has attended, including if you have multiple staff sitting around the same monitor or presentation board. And with that, Emily, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. And so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Emily Roach. I'm the hemp testing specialist for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Today, I'm going to be giving the 2022 laboratory hemp sampler training. For those who aren't able to attend today, as Sunny had mentioned, we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel. So that'll be there for folks that aren't able to attend today, or that if people want to use this video as a reference later on throughout the year. Just please be sure that all samplers watch this training before conducting any sampling. I wanted to give you all an idea of the topics that we're going to cover today in the training. So first, I'll start off by giving an overview of hemp and our hemp program. Then I'll describe the pre-harvest testing requirements that licensed growers have. I'll explain how growers actually go about requesting pre-harvest testing from labs. And then I'll go over the sampling protocols for pre-harvest hemp testing. I'll also describe the ways that you report pre-harvest testing to our department. And lastly, I'm going to go over some of the recent rule changes that impact pre-harvest testing and reporting. We should have some time at the end for questions, as Sunny had mentioned. However, feel free, if we're going along and you've got a question, to put it in the chat, and we can kind of go over questions as we go along as well. So first, for those of you who may not know, hemp is defined as cannabis with a total THC concentration that's at or below 0.3%. Hemp and marijuana, which you may have heard of before, are different varieties of the same plant. However, hemp usually has higher concentrations of CBD and lower concentrations of THC, which is the main intoxicating component of cannabis. Hemp is used in a variety of things, from cosmetics to foods to supplements, tinctures, salves, and much more. The ODA hemp program licenses hemp growers, handlers, and seed producers. Our program also ensures that all of our licensees have their hemp or hemp items tested as required. So growers are required to have their hemp tested prior to harvest, and this is what we refer to as a pre-harvest test. And handlers are also required to have the items that they produce or process tested as well, and that's what we refer to as post-harvest testing, which we could, no, Sunny's letting me know the slide in advance. Okay, are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yeah, and now it's on the ODA hemp program.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, technology. So post-harvest testing is a whole separate can of worms, which I would be happy to give another presentation on. So today's focus is going to be pre-harvest testing, but let me know if you all think that a presentation on post-harvest testing would be valuable, especially since there's been some changes with that as well. The hemp program regulates hemp in Oregon using Oregon Administrative Rule 603-048. These are available on our website, and I highly, highly recommend that you familiarize yourselves with these rules, just so that you know the requirements that our growers and handlers have when it comes to testing in general.
Ron, you have a question?
I can't find the chat. I'm sorry, Sunny. Where's the chat button? You said to include it. I don't
Yeah.
see it. That's why I clicked the hand. I thought it was going to let me send a chat. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm embarrassed
no
now.
worries. For my computer, it's at the top, kind of right-hand side. I don't know if your screen looks the same as mine. I'll make sure to mark that you're here, Ron.
Thanks.
Yeah, no
Sorry to
worries.
interrupt.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, I have Teams is a whole nother. We used to have GoToMeeting and now we're on Teams, so thanks for your guys' patience. So as I mentioned earlier, hemp growers are required to have all of the areas licensed to them, sampled and tested by a laboratory accredited by the Oregon Health Authority and licensed by the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission before harvesting. So I think primarily that's all of you. So growers are required to use an accredited lab to do their pre-harvest testing. And they also must do things like send in a sample request form to the lab prior to any sampling, which I'll go over in the next slide. They must also make sure that their test reports and all of the sampling paperwork are submitted to our department. And they're also required to have the area harvested within 30 days from the date that the sampling occurred. And it's not a new requirement, but components of that requirement have changed. So I'm going to be going over that towards the end of the presentation as well. But generally, this year they have 30 days to sample that area or to harvest that area that was sampled. Next, I wanted to go over the sample request form. So this is the form that you should receive from the grower before you do any sampling. Usually growers will send this to the labs when they're scheduling their pre-harvest sampling. So I wanted to go over a few key points on this form. First is that the grow site can have multiple production areas. So this is basically information that we collect on the grower license application. We ask for things like a grow site name and production area names. So if a grower has that application with them, it should be fairly simple to fill out all of these parts of this form. But essentially the grow site name is what I like to think of as an overall farm. And then the production areas are the areas on that farm that you're actually producing hemp in. So for my farm, I might have 2 different fields and 3 different greenhouses. And those are each separate production areas that I'm going to need to get tested separately. So that's what these are referring to. And I also have a separate area for a harvest lot name. And we can get into harvest lots a little bit later, but essentially any area that you're harvesting from a production area is a harvest lot. And if a grower wanted to divide a production area up into even more harvest lots, then they could use this harvest lot designation portion. So for example, if I had a section of my greenhouse that was maturing faster than the other section of it, I could decide that I want that's the faster maturing section to be my first harvest lot. So I would then put my greenhouse name under the harvest lot name and use the designations that I have basically laid out for it. So you put the production area name, -2022-001 for that first harvest lot. And then when it's time to sample and harvest the second harvest lot, you would do the same thing, but just put 002, or the growers would. So that's essentially what that is. And harvest lots can get complicated, at least for me. So feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions about that, or if a grower is having trouble when they're filling out the paperwork. But essentially most of the stuff, as I said, should be obtained from their application. And I have had labs in the past request copies of an application to see kind of what the areas are that the person is actually licensed for. Another thing I wanted to mention was the business name. So it's pretty frequent that we have incorrect business names on the testing documents. So a lot of times people have multiple businesses and they forget like which business they license for which grow site. So I like to have basically everyone makes sure that that business name is what is on the license for that address. It becomes an issue when at the end of the year, we're going over test reports and we're looking at who has submitted test reports. And basically, if we have a test report for a business that isn't in our system, it's not really going to tie to anyone. And it's not going to tie to the person that it actually was for or the grow site that it was for. So keep that in mind. If we reach out to at the end of the year, it might be because of the business name issue. Similarly with the grower name, just making sure that that name is the person who is licensed for that grow site. That's really helpful for us. And a grower, as I said, must submit a complete sample request form for each harvest lot being sampled. So if I'm having 3 greenhouses sampled and tested this season, I'm going to need to fill out 3 sample request forms. Okay, so to be sufficient to meet the requirement for pre-harvest sampling and testing, testing must be conducted as described in Exhibit A and Exhibit B protocols. These are found in Oregon Administrative Rule 603-048 that I mentioned earlier. And I'll be going over some parts of the sampling protocols, but not every part. So it's really important that you familiarize yourself with both of these exhibits before any sampling or testing. And I've included links to the protocols here as well. And as a side note, I'm going to save this presentation as a PDF. And so if anyone wants a copy of the presentation, I'd be happy to email it over to you. So you have this as a reference and you have the links as well. But basically, everything's on our website. It's always a good place to start. So yeah, familiarize yourselves with Exhibit A and Exhibit B, please. So regarding on-site sampling, I do have a few key points just off the top. So only samples taken by and remaining in the chain of custody of an authorized laboratory qualifies for testing. The sampling of a harvest lot must produce a representative sample of the entire lot. You must avoid contamination of the sample and disinfect all of your sampling tools after you finish collecting the samples. If a grower is growing for flower, you can only sample plants with flowers present. So this is something that you're going to look for on the sample request form. There's a section on that form that asks for what the intended use of the harvest lot is. And if it says flower, you need to make sure that when you're going to the site that there are flowers there on the plants. And if there are no flowers for you to sample, you'll need to reschedule and come back at a later date when there are flowers present. Lastly, this is a pre-harvest test. So you can't accept harvested hemp as a sample for this test. The plants that you would need for the sample are plants that are going to be growing and that you're going to take a sample of yourself. So I've included an equipment and supply list for sampling on this slide. Please make sure that you have all of the necessary equipment before you arrive on site. So the first step you're going to do when you get to the site is you're going to meet with the site representative and go over the sample request form that they submitted. This is important because sometimes you'll run into an issue where you get to the site and it's really nothing like they described on their sample request form, or at least the area that they want you to sample. Maybe they said it was a 10-acre field and it's actually a 1-acre field. So that's stuff to address when you get to the site and you're going over that form. And you can have them correct the form, or you can make note of it on your form. But that's a useful thing for folks to do. The second step is you're going to survey the site and choose the best sampling pattern for that harvest lot. So I'll go over sampling patterns in the next slide, but essentially you're going to look at the field or the greenhouse and you're going to determine how you're going to get your samples, what path you're going to take. And then after you do that, you can either begin sampling right away, or you can start on your on-site sample form. So this is the form that the samplers fill out. It looks pretty much identical to the sample request form from the growers, but it's basically the sampler's form for them to document where they took the sample and how they took the sample. So you can either start on that before you actually take your sample or right after you take your sample. it doesn't really matter. Oh, go ahead.
The form isn't showing.
Oh, well, it's not, I don't have it on here.
Oh, okay, sorry. We're still on arriving on site.
Yeah, so
Perfect.
I'll go over the form in more detail in 2 slides. Sorry if that got confusing, but you're going to complete this form either right before you take your sample or right after you take your sample. As long as you're on site, that shouldn't be an issue. But the types of equipment that you'll need are forms. So even including extra sample request forms, that can be useful if you get to a site and a grower is like, hey, like I've got this other greenhouse that I forgot about. I think it's ready. And do you think you can take a sample there too? That would be fine as long as they fill out their sample request forms and get that to you before you sample. So that's why it's important to have those. It's also important to have chain of custody forms so you can make sure you're filling those out. And of course, your on-site sample forms that the samplers fill out. You're going to need paper bags for your samples, permanent markers or pens, shears, single-use coveralls, disposable gloves, some sort of disinfectant. And I like to have a clicker with me just because, especially in larger areas, it's very easy to lose track of the amount of samples that you're taking. So I like to have those so I don't have to go dig through my bag to figure out how many I took, but that's optional. So these are the 2 approved sampling patterns. Sampling needs to be done in a sawtooth pattern. As you see on the left image, the sampler is starting their sampling in the upper left-hand corner, and the yellow dots are where they're taking their samples. The image on the right shows a similar pattern, but the sampler is starting in the bottom left-hand corner. And again, the yellow dots are where they're taking their samples. So it's basically the same. It's just a sawtooth pattern, and you need to follow it to the maximum extent possible. However, there are certain field conditions where you're just not able to follow it exactly, and that's okay, as long as you're only slightly deviating from it and the sample you collect is still representative of the entire lot and the lot is contiguous. So that doesn't mean if the lot isn't contiguous that you can go ahead and sample. It just means that generally, each site is different and you're going to run into situations where it's going to be harder to do this pattern exactly. So that's fine. Just make sure you document it. Here is what the on-site sampling form looks like. Like I said, this is available on our website, and this is what's going to be filled out by the sampler. It can't be completed by the grower or the person requesting sampling. So the sampler themselves need to fill it out. And I did mention that a lot of it is the same as a sample request form. And it's okay to get some of the information off of the sample request form, like your GPS coordinates, obviously the grower business name, the address, things like that. But if anything stands out to you as maybe you're not really agreeing with that, or it's incorrect on the sample request form, those are things to point out on your on-site sample form. So just keep that in mind as you're going along. A couple things to mention about this form. There are certain things that are helpful to include, like the number of samples taken. That's helpful. Any obstacles or barriers that prevent your ability from doing the sawtooth pattern. So that's something you can write down in your little map. And then any harvest lots that remain unsampled are important as well. So if you get to a site and there's 10 greenhouses of hemp and they ask you to sample 9, that would be helpful to include on this form that you left 1 untested and which one it was. Something else that is really important for these forms are the visual depiction. So this is on the second page. It's this large square area, and this is where you're going to basically sketch the area that you sampled and how you took your sample. So this is really important. It doesn't have to be super detailed. I'm not artistically gifted myself, so my maps would probably look really bad, but just a general idea of where the harvest lot was that you took the sample and then how you took that sample. And this is where you would include, if you had any issues with following that sawtooth pattern, you would most likely include it in this map. So that's that. If you have any questions filling this out, feel free to give me a call, even if you're in the field. When it comes to actual sample collection, you're going to want to cut approximately 5 to 8 inches in length from the main stem, and that includes the leaves and the flowers, the terminal bud that occurs at the end of the stem, or the central cola. So you're going to want to take about 5 to 8 inches of any of those. And then you're also going to want to avoid sampling dead or diseased plants. And you're only going to take 1 sample per plant randomly throughout the harvest lot. So as you're following that sawtooth pattern, you're just taking 1 sample per plant as you're doing that sawtooth pattern. And then you're going to take each sample and put it into a paper bag. So all of the samples are going to be collected into a single paper bag, and that's what I refer to as a composite sample. And it's, as I mentioned, it's all going to be in one bag because it's supposed to represent the entire lot. So you don't need to separate it out into individual small bags. That would be a lot of bags, but all of your samples go into one. So each composite sample, or each large bag of your samples, should consist of a maximum of about 30 plant heads of about 5 to 8 inches. So for small fields, or if you know the amount of plants that were planted, you're going to use the hypergeometric table, which is on this slide. This is also an Exhibit A of the sampling protocol. So for example, if you know that there are 20 plants in a harvest lot, you're going to take 16 samples. If you know that there are 110, you're going to take 26 samples. So this is really useful for that. Just make sure that the sample size that you collect is more than 4 ounces, or it cannot be less than 4 ounces, which is the minimum amount for any laboratory tests or file samples. I wanted to talk about non-contiguous areas really quick because this does come up every season, no matter what we do, but just don't sample non-contiguous areas. A greenhouse is one contiguous area, but 10 greenhouses is not one contiguous area. So I like to think of a contiguous area as an area without any barriers. And so 1 greenhouse is fine, but 10 greenhouses, obviously you have barriers in between each greenhouse. Hoop houses are the same, and this is a debate among growers, but a hoop house we look at as the same. So 1 hoop house is 1 contiguous area, and 10 hoop houses are 10 different areas. I have had situations where samplers have been in the field and they have gone to a site with 4 or 5 hoop houses, and the grower just rolls up the sides and says, okay, you can just sample all of it. And that's not allowed. If a person wanted to combine their production areas, they would need to go through the proper steps to do that, and that involves licensing and all that sort of stuff, and it definitely needs to be taken care of before you get there. Our licensing staff verify that each registered site or licensed site has contiguous areas, and they're making sure through the application process that the areas that people are registering are contiguous from the start. So if someone says, oh, my greenhouse 1 through 5 is one area, chances are we reached out to them in the application process and told them that they needed to separate those areas out and license them separately and also test them separately. So if you get to a site and it's not looking really contiguous, the chances are that it wasn't licensed that way. So it's probably an issue, and so definitely only sample a contiguous area. Fields with roads, like county roads, and fields with huge fences or huge irrigation ditches, tree lines, those are all non-contiguous areas, and they'll need to be separated out before you can take a sample. Basically, anything that prevents your ability to do a representative sample or to take one, it's probably not contiguous if that's the situation. So just be aware of that. Okay, so after you've collected all your samples from a production area or a harvest lot, and you've placed them into a single paper bag. You're going to seal the bag and record on the bag the field name or the harvest lot identifier, the production area name, the grower name or the business name, and then you're going to sign and date the bag. So you must maintain the sample integrity and custody during the transport to the laboratory. And this is where you're also going to be sure to maintain a chain of custody form. It's really important. There are 2 ways to report pre-harvest test results to the ODA. So you can do that by email or online. And some of the labs already have a link to submit your results online. If you don't have that link and you'd like one, let me know and I'll send it to you. I just ask that you keep that internal and don't send it around. If you're submitting your test reports online, you don't have to fill out an ODA pre-harvest THC report, which I'll go over in the next slide. But basically, the form that you're filling out online is that report. So you're going to fill out that form online, and then you're going to attach the on-site sampling form from the sampler and the sample request form from the grower. Once you've hit enter and submitted those results, it generates a PDF of the test report, and you'll need to send that test report along with the sampling documents to the grower who requested testing. If you were around last year, I had said that I was working on a way to get it so that when you click submit, it would automatically send the test reports to the grower, and I'm still working on that. So thanks for your patience, but for right now, we still need to follow that protocol where you're just saving the PDF that it generates and sending it to the grower. So you could also, as I said, submit via email. And if you are submitting using email, you'll need to actually fill out that THC report and then send the on-site sample form and the sample request form to the hemp test reports at oda.oregon.gov email address. You'll also need to send the grower who requested testing all of that stuff too. So in both of these situations, you're sending the grower as well as us the test reports. There are some benefits to sending us your reports online. So as you know, if you've been doing this for a while, there are issues with emails like bouncing back or going to our junk email or just not even being delivered, attachments not being delivered and stuff like that. So if you do it online, it greatly reduces the chance of that. Also, when you report online, we're basically immediately notified of any failed tests. So it's really important for that because growers have really quick deadlines that they have to follow if they're wanting any retesting or resampling. So the quicker that we're notified of those tests, the quicker we can help growers through that. And I will say during the busy season, our email gets just slammed with test reports. And so we have to go through those one by one to see, if people failed or not. And then we have to manually enter those into our system. Versus if you're just doing it online, it's kind of just automatically there. So that's the benefit to doing online. However, if email works for you, you're more than welcome to do that. It's whatever works best for you. So this is the pre-harvest THC report that I was talking about. This is the form that you're going to fill out if you're submitting online or by email, I mean. So this is on our website. So if you're sending it in by email, you're going to fill out this form, attach this form to the email as long as your 2 sampling forms, and then send that to us and the grower. I wanted to go over some common issues that we see. I will say that these are starting to be not common issues. So thank you to everyone for helping us kind of combat these issues. It's been a lot better than it was in previous years, but it just happened. And so I like to just kind of comment on them. We do run into issues with labs not reporting test reports. So I think, as I mentioned before, we do have issues sometimes with the email and technology, but there are times where the labs haven't sent us the results, and that usually comes up at the end of the year when we're going through all of the testing, and we're looking at who submitted testing, and we're reaching out to the growers who didn't report any testing. And so if you get an email at the end of the year asking for those, then usually you guys are all really good at just sending them in, and it's not really that big of an issue, but it is important, especially if someone failed, to timely report those. We do have issues with people combining production areas, like I was mentioning. So I know it's hard. Sometimes as a sampler, you're there and you're not really sure, but it's definitely a theme for people to try to combine their production areas for testing in particular. So definitely just keep an eye out on that. And if you're not sure, feel free to call me in the field. Like I have had conversations with growers with the sampler right there, telling them that, these areas need to be tested separately, and I'm more than happy to do that. So that's another important thing, which is kind of the same thing as sampling a non-contiguous area. So I won't touch on that, but we have had an instance with 2 growers' fields that are adjacent before. So if you've got 2 licensed growers and their fields kind of back up to each other, and you as a sampler, you get there and you can do it. Like there's no barriers, it's contiguous, and you can sample it all as one. You might think you're doing them a favor, but it's very problematic for a lot of reasons, and reasons that I won't really get into, but you can't do that. They need to be licensed separately. And if people wanted to combine production areas, like I said, that's dealt with on the licensing end, and that needs to be taken care of before you get there. So that happens. Incorrectly advising growers on current rules and regulations, that's problematic for obvious reasons. I think it's a natural thing to get to a site, and I mean, you're doing compliance testing, so compliance comes up. But if someone's asking for like very specific advice about their very specific situation, it's probably best to just refer them to us and let us handle that. And if they don't want to talk to me, there's lots of other people who they could talk to. So another thing that we see is illegible or incomplete paperwork. So each one of those boxes on each one of those forms are important. I try to make them as short and simple as possible, but I promise you that every box that is on there is necessary. So please make sure that they're filled out and that we can read what's on the forms. Moving on to failed pre-harvest tests. So the failed pre-harvest test reports must be reported to our department within 24 hours. Growers do have options after getting a fail. They can retest, they can get a resample. If neither option is chosen, or if those options fail, the harvest lot must be destroyed. And we work with the grower through that process. So if you have a failed, if someone had failed the test, just refer them to us as you notified them of the failed result, and we can take care of it from there. But they definitely do have options, so it's important to know that. There are quite a few rule changes that became effective at the beginning of the year that I wanted to go over. Here's a list of them. So there's been changes to the number of strains you're allowed to grow in a harvest lot, the pass-fail criteria for pre-harvest tests, the harvest window, the access that samplers have to grow sites, and there are new USDA reporting requirements as well. So before January 1st of this year, growers could grow as many strains as they wanted in a single harvest lot. However, on and after January 1st, growers can only grow 1 strain in each harvest lot. So I've included the text from the current rule that defines a harvest lot as a quantity of cannabis of the same variety or strain that is harvested in a distinct time frame. So that's new, and I expect some people not to know about that. So on the sample request form, there's a box that asks for the strain type. And if you see that someone has multiple strain types in that box, that's probably not good, and you should reach out to me and I can help the grower go over things with them. But that's a new requirement this year. Another thing that I think is probably the most confusing out of all of the changes is the pass or fail criteria for pre-harvest tests. So before January 1st of this year, a pre-harvest test is considered failing if it was above 0.34% total THC, because we allowed for rounding down to 0.3. However, on and after January 1st of this year, a test is now considered failing if the result, with the measurement of uncertainty applied to that result, does not produce a range of results that includes 0.3% or lower. So what I mean by that is if you get a result that's 0.36% and your measurement of uncertainty is 15%, with that measurement of uncertainty applied to the result, you're going to get a range. So you're going to plus that and minus that from your percentage. And the range for this would be 0.31 to 0.41. So that's not passing. That's not considered passing. However, if you get the same result, 0.36, and you have a measurement of uncertainty of 17%, when that's applied, it kind of broadens the range a little bit. So that opens it up to 0.30, which would be considered passing at that point. So I hope I'm making sense. If you have questions about it, feel free to contact me. You all probably know it way better than I do because you're chemists, some of you. So, but I can try to help you out. But yeah, essentially, we're asking for measurement of uncertainty to be reported now, and then applying that to the result. So also before January 1st of this year, the requirement for growers was that they had to begin harvesting their hemp within 28 days from the date of sampling. However, on and after January 1st of this year, growers must have their harvest completed within 30 days from that date of sampling. And if they're not able to complete their harvest within that time frame, they'll need to have someone come out again and sample the remaining hemp that's in that harvest lot before they can harvest the remainder of that. So that's new as well, and I'm trying to reach out to growers about it. So as you're doing your sampling, that would be helpful to mention, but it is new this year. This is straight from our rule, and I thought it would be important to mention. Growers or authorized representatives must now provide the sampler with unrestricted and unobstructed access to all hemp and other cannabis plants, whether growing or harvested, on all lands, buildings, and other structures used for cultivation, handling, and storage of all hemp and cannabis, and all other locations listed in the grower's license. So the reason I wanted to include this was to let you know that if you're at a site and you're wanting to sample a field, and the way you have it mapped out, you're going to go in a particular pattern or a particular way that the grower doesn't want you to go, let me know, because they are supposed to provide you with unrestricted access for you to obtain that sample. So if that happens, contact me and we can handle that. And lastly, laboratories are now required to report all results from pre-harvest testing to the USDA. The information must include the grower's license number, the name, the business address of the grower, harvest lot identifiers, the name of the laboratory, and the date of the test and report. So this is just another reason to make sure that the information you're collecting while you're doing your sampling is accurate and up to date. And you can report this information using the USDA's Hemp platform, which I've included a link here too. So that concludes my 2022 sampler training. My contact information and helpful links are on this slide. And like I said, please feel free to reach out to me if you run into any issues in the field or if you have any questions about any of this stuff. So I think now I have time for questions if anybody has any.
Let's start with Bob and then we'll go to Alex.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
So, a couple quick questions. In the past, especially the last couple of years, a grower may register X amount of acreage for their production area, and then they just realized they flat ran out of money or didn't quite grow as many plants as they had thought. Is that something you still want us to document on the form? Is that helpful for you if they say their production area was 5 acres and they only have an acre that they grew? Is that something you want?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's super beneficial for us because at the end of the year, we'll go through and look at all those forms and try to figure out, what happened for folks that maybe are missing some test reports or some acreage. So it is super helpful to include that information on your forms.
And also, we attended, I think it was the very first you had on at your facility in Salem with, was it Randy? And it was a while back, before all this COVID. So what they had advised us on that form, you have an option. Are you growing for flower or are you growing for biomass or both? They had indicated that, biomass is more probably frequent and that we would sample from all parts of the plant. And I'm noticing that the nomenclature on your slide indicates that we're supposed to just take our samples from the main branch. Is that in the spirit? Does that aid as flower versus biomass? I think a lot of people are growing for biomass. Does that distinction have any impact on how we sample? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially, really, it's my first thought is the most important thing is if someone's growing for flower, you're making sure that flower is present when you're taking your samples. And if there isn't flower present, then you have to reschedule and come back. But I'm going to go back to the definition that I had in my slide to kind of reread it. But Sunny, do you have any thoughts on that? Because the language did change this year for sample collection for that.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter what they're growing for, that distinction between flower and biomass. Biomass usually is going to include flower as well. You can pull from different places on the plant, but you want that section that's going to have the flower at the growing point, the tip of it, so that we're making sure, worst case scenario, the amount of THC that's in that plant material. Okay, Alex.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the training. Second of all, a quick comment on the margin of error. Overlap just came out with a margin of error now. It used to be 20%, but it now can only be no more than 10%. But the question I actually had was, could you give us an idea of the state of the hemp industry as far as like I know like 3 years ago there was like 1,500 growers. I think last year there was only like 800. Do you have any idea like how many people are still registered or may have a crop this year?
I'll take it. Emily's looking at me. So couple things. This is the first year that we are operating under a USDA approved state plan. And part of that requires that we do a criminal background check on hemp growers and any key participants or folks who have ownership interest in that business. We are experiencing a severe hiccup, and that's probably the nicest term I can use for it, with getting the ability to do that background check with the FBI. So currently we have not issued any licenses for growers. Folks who sent in a renewal application, so they were licensed last year and sent in their renewal prior to December 31st, are legal to continue to operate until ODA is able to make that determination. So that's one part of your question. And then the other part is we're definitely seeing another decrease in the number of businesses that are interested in growing. Last I heard, as of a day or two ago, we probably had right around 300 grower applications in the queue. So definitely lower than that 800 number that you were talking about previously.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. If I have any more questions, I'll hit you up later. Thanks.
Perfect. I don't see any other hands. Any of the folks on the phone? I know sometimes it's harder for you to navigate within Teams. Any questions there? Okay. There was a question in the chat about the slides being available on the ODA website. We will make the slides available as a PDF. Give Emily and I a little bit of grace on getting the information loaded onto our website. Don't start beating our doors down until maybe next week. And we appreciate your time. If you have staff who view this training later in the year, you add new staff, please be sure to let Emily know that the staff had viewed the training. If we find out later that they had not viewed the training, then those test results may not be valid for the grower, and that would be really frustrating for everybody involved. Anything else that you wanted to add, Emily?
No, just I would like to say thanks to all the labs. You guys are great. I've certainly seen a lot of good progress over the years, and we're achieving a lot over the years. So I'm really grateful for that, and thank you again for all of your patience.
Okay, with that, we will thank you and talk to you another time.
Thank you.